And as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to take it down, but if you want to, you can. It's okay to. It's kind of nice to have a visual.
Yeah, I agree. I don't really want my face to be the main thing anyway. So why don't we just keep it, and then
as far as I'm concerned, you don't have to take it down, but if you. All right, Trish, we have the delay coming through. I don't know if that will happen.
It's like a 20-second delay. I just turned off the sound on YouTube.
Okay.
So I don't echo. But it looks like it's recording. So okay.
We have though, when you asked about tips on because it's a webinar, people, we don't hear them and they're not like unmuted, talking to their spouse, when they're not supposed to be or whatever. Yeah. So it's usually technologically, quiet, but I like your idea of presenting questions to them and have us respond in chat. I think that's a nice interactive way to do things.
Yeah, I definitely think, especially with the topic, one of the things I want to make sure I'm doing is trying not to only talk at people, because the whole point of this initiative is to get people involved. I'm definitely going to present a lot of information today, but I wanted to make sure there was something where people could do a little self-reflection and feedback too.
No, that's great. And I was even thinking we open the waiting room about 5 minutes before we actually start at 10 o'clock, just to let people filter in. And I thought I would tell them, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. And if you are involved in any sort of civic work or, a nonprofit or anybody, to let us know that, just so we know.
Yeah.
And
well, and this is a group that by definition, we know are engaged.
Right.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned, I know that we have people who are involved with the League of Women Voters. And I know one of our board members serves on her town board. And, so there's different aspects. The Civics Club itself is more educational. We don't do a lot of like service projects or things, but we do give away those youth grants to support civic work that's being done. So that's sort of one of our missions, to do that, as well as educate ourselves. And I hope motivate people to beyond their attendance at these forums to do other things. So I hope this will serve to do that.
Do you know, from the history of this particular club, was it just a locally inspired effort, or are there civics clubs across Wisconsin communities what's the genesis? I mean, it would be neat to kind of think that through, if eventually maybe we could promote this model.
It was set up right before women got the right to vote in Wisconsin, because they wanted to make sure they were educated in various civic issues so they'd be ready to vote when that passed. So
wow.
Yep. It was similar to the League of Women Voters. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was the wife of the State Journal publisher or editor who was heavily involved in starting it. And part of it was, just like the League of Women Voters, to have this kind of this venue, so they couldn't use the argument that women aren't educated on the issues.
Mm-hmm.
And and so it was actually started before the League of Women Voters. So it was, and it is, as far as I know, a local thing. It wasn't necessarily, it's not something that there's a model like this all over. But yeah, they brought in really big name speakers, through the early days, like Eleanor Roosevelt and also, all sorts of really huge names, and even into a little bit more modern era. But things have kind of, along those lines, really did kind of dwindle, because a lot of the big name speakers, like the cost of bringing them to Madison and to pay their speaker's fee and to travel and all this other stuff was, that could be tens of thousands of dollars, and we just didn't have that kind of money to do that. So we really started shifting toward more local speakers that could, and a lot, I still think they're really good speakers like you, but they're not, they're not, whatever, Barack Obama or Michelle Obama or something like that.
Yeah. There's a beep in my kitchen that I'm going to go just quickly try to address.
Okay.
Bear with me.
It's freezing in this living room. Whew. I've got my Indian shawl. Yak
No,
shawl.
this room is cold for me too. I don't know what it is. It's probably that the heater vent in this room doesn't work as good as others, but that's all right. They say that having a little bit of, for people who are in, oh, I don't know, television shows, it's colder in the studios because the hot lights, they want people to be energetic. And so,
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Not have a nap in the middle of your, yeah.
right, because if it's warm and cozy, you're going to nod off,
Yeah.
so, but, all right. So, yeah, I think it's, I'm hoping, I'll see how it goes, Mary Beth, but at the very end, there might be a question in terms of the health of nonprofits, because I did see an article, and I'm not positive you were quoted in this one, but how the pandemic really either changed or, it impacted nonprofits in a great way.
Yeah, the Madison 365, that was a really great article. They did a lot of, that you could tell they worked on it for a long time and talked to a lot of people. And I've been meaning to post that through our center's webpage. They did not interview me, but a lot of our steering committee, or rather advisory board members, like Bob Ford and others, were interviewed. And I don't disagree with any of the points of that. And it was also pretty Madison focused, which I think, for this audience makes a lot of sense, but I tend to kind of make sure I'm always thinking statewide and worldwide, just because Madison is such a specific context. But one of the things I'm going to talk about briefly here is the way that we're living in a quadruple pandemic world, with racial justice, environmental degradation, democratic institution decline, and the pandemic itself. And I think all of those things are really bearing on all of our civil society organizations, and also upping the ante on why we need them so much, So
great. Well, good. And this might motivate people to not only get civically involved in all sorts of aspects, but also the Madison Civics Club. We have a good, 100 plus people, 120 some people that were members before the pandemic. And I hope that we can continue to keep that stable, or at least, and even, grow a little bit. So maybe we need volunteers to serve on our board, volunteers to be at the events, and that's something that we're going to have to be working on ourselves as we come out of this pandemic.
Yeah.
So, Trish, do you wanna open up pretty soon? Or?
Carol wrote again and said she didn't get the link. I sent it to you and her. I think she's one I've had to deal with before on the phone while the webinar was going on. I don't know what's going on with her. Anyway, let me get started.
Oh, one last question. I will, whenever I screen share, it's always a little hard to also monitor other things. So if you'd be willing to monitor the chat and just interrupt me if something.
Sure. And normally what we do is, if there's anything urgent, I will, but normally we wait for the Q&A. When you're done, we can do a, more formal Q&A.
Okay. Sounds great.
I'm going to go ahead and disappear, but I'm back here monitoring everything.
Trish, we'll have to tell some Boone tales more in the future. I'm glad to know that connection.
Yeah. All right, hang on.
Okay, we have opened up the waiting room. Welcome to those of you who are joining us for our Madison Civics Club presentation on the civic health of Wisconsin. And as we are waiting to start, we'll start in about 5 minutes or so. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to do that. Tell us who you are, where you're from. Maybe if you're involved in some sort of civic activity. Are you a volunteer somewhere, or do you have a nonprofit or some other type of civic involvement that you'd like to share? It'd be nice in the chat to at least introduce ourselves. I am Joy Cardine. I'm not going to type in the chat right now, but I'll be your moderator today. I am the co-chair of the Madison Civics Club. In my spare time, I am the president of my neighborhood association. I also am on the board of the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin. I'm an active member in the League of Women Voters of Dane County. I volunteer for the Red Cross, and I also volunteer for Attic Angel, a senior living community in Madison. So, oh, and I'm on the Dane County Humane Society board as well. So I try to stay very busy since I've retired from Wisconsin Public Radio. But so please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Won't make you, but it'd be nice to see who we have with us, and why you are involved with civic activities. Maybe you are a member, or I should say perhaps a previous member of the Madison Civics Club. We haven't really asked for membership dues through the pandemic, so but we hope to get started soon. I will let you know more about that coming up. Also, we will be issuing a youth grant after our presentation today. So we hope that you will stay with us for the youth grant presentation. And we hope that you will consider volunteering to serve on the board or serve in some capacity with the Madison Civics Club. We are planning on having our first in-person event since the pandemic coming up on April 23rd. We are going to be holding a workshop along with our regular breakfast buffet that we have been doing in recent years. We are going to have a workshop on April 23rd that is going to be conducted by the Braver Angels organization. This is a group that tries to bring red and blue together, tries to bridge the political divide in Wisconsin. And we are going to learn from the co-coordinators of this group, Sue Vergeront, who is a former Republican state lawmaker, and Cameron Swallow, who is a former educator, one representing the blue side of the political spectrum and one representing the red side of the political spectrum. And the workshop that they will hold for us on April 23rd is called Depolarization Within. And it's a way for us to try to depolarize our political or civil discourse with other people who hold views that are different than our own. So I do hope that you will be able to join us for that in person, we hope, on April 23rd. And we will need some volunteers to help with hospitality. We need some volunteers who want to plan future programs for the Madison Civics Club. So if you're interested in volunteering, please do send an email to info@madisoncivicsclub.org, info@madisoncivicsclub.org. So we hope that you will consider that. All right, we're going to get started in just a minute or two, letting people still file in from the waiting room. And we will continue to take your introductions on the on chat. So thanks very much. Oh, look at this. We have, one just popped up. Marion, who is a 6th grade student at Senate Middle School, is here. And she is here among some other classmates and her homeroom teacher to accept the youth grant that we are giving away at the end of the presentation. So that's wonderful. Welcome, Marion. And welcome to everybody. So, all right, we're going to get started just because we do have a timeline to follow here a little bit. Welcome to the first Madison Civics Club presentation for 2022. I'm Joy Cardine, co-chair of the Madison Civics Club. I'll be your moderator today as we hear about the civic health of Wisconsin and the efforts that are underway to improve it. Our speaker today is one of the lead authors of a report on Wisconsin's civic health, and she is helping to lead an effort to improve our civic health statewide. I know she'll have some questions for us, and we'll ask you to respond in the chat section during her presentation. And if you have a question for her, please type it in the Q&A section, and I will ask it after she concludes her talk. And do please stay with us after the discussion. We will present a youth grant to Senate Middle School and a group that is working to improve the civic health of their school and the community at large. First, let me introduce our speaker today, Mary Beth Collins. She is the Executive Director of the UW-Madison Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies. In addition, she's had several years of experience working as an attorney, a nonprofit professional, and an instructor. She is one of the authors of the report, Civic Health in Wisconsin, and we have posted that on the Madison Civics Club website, and is helping to guide this statewide initiative to strengthen the civic engagement in Wisconsin communities. Mary Beth Collins, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you very much, Joy and Trish. Thanks for your warm welcome and coordination of this event. And thanks to the many number of people that have logged on here on a Saturday morning, which is no small thing. So want to congratulate everyone right away on being so engaged with issues of civics. And I got to learn a little bit about the history of this organization coming into today's event. And I'm very honored to just be able to present to this group with such a decorated history, reaching back to, early years of fuller participation with women gaining suffrage. It sounds like the genesis of this organization connects to that period. And I think it's an important thing for us to remember that as a Wisconsin and as a United States of America, it isn't so long ago that there were entire groups that were not participating in the same way as everyone else. And that's a theme that I think we need to stay very mindful of, even as we move forward. So again, I am from the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I hope that as we wrap up the official presentation today, I can share a little bit more with you about how to stay connected to us. But today we're going to focus on one of our marquee initiatives, Civic Health of Wisconsin. And I will try to kind of give you an overview of that initiative and some of the themes that pertain to it. And yes, hopefully find ways to get your feedback as well as encourage you to get involved. So I like to provide a little bit of a roadmap whenever I do a presentation where I'm going to be talking for a long time. Ideally, we have more of a discussion anytime we get together, but today I will be downloading some information to you. And my slides may have some glitches like I'm seeing here because I'm working off of Google Slides, but I'll make these available later if anybody wants them, just in case some of the words get cut off like you see on this slide. Our roadmap for today, though, I am using that image of a beautiful road in the Driftless. I am currently sitting in La Crosse, Wisconsin, where I'm originally from, visiting family, and that region is also represented in the photo, but just a little image for gonna share with you where we're kind of going today. So roadmap for today, I wanna give you a little bit of background on what even is the notion of civic health. How do people define that term? Even though you're part of a civics club and many people know about the term civic engagement, sometimes the term civic health is new to folks, but that is the term that's been used in some of the national level initiatives that we are bringing Wisconsin into. So we'll get into that a little bit. And I'd love to just discuss with you some of the findings and gaps of the inaugural Civic Health of Wisconsin report. Joy mentioned that in her intro. I'll give you some highlights from that and make sure you know where to find the report. From the report, we have built an burgeoning Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative, which is a nonpartisan statewide or Wisconsin-wide initiative that we hope will, from very many different angles and facets, promote optimal civic health in Wisconsin. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about that. And it's very important right now. I've been really reflecting on this in my classes that I teach and the presentations that I give. I think it's always important to highlight there is a moment of urgency and emergency that we kind of are in right now that I refer to as a quadruple pandemic, 4-alarm fire. Not trying to overly alarm you this morning on a Saturday while you're relaxing with your coffee, but I do think it's important to say there are some very urgent global phenomena that we're facing right now, and civics and civic engagement is going to be essential for our ability to get through those things. I'd like to get your feedback, input, and suggestions on how our initiative can do well for Wisconsin. You are experts, you are engaged in your own communities. We want to get that kind of input anytime we're talking to groups. And one way we'll do that is I've got a couple of participation-based exercises where you can reflect and then put some information forth in the chat. And we'll make sure we can all stay connected after today. A couple of other little housekeeping things I want to share. I have a very touchy computer, which you might have noticed when we were getting our introduction from Joy. And sometimes my slides advance a little bit more rapidly than I want them to. So just bear with me if that happens. I'm not trying to be confusing with the advancing of the slides, but I've noticed that my computer all through the Zoom life, it still is a little touchy. So here we go. So let's start with civic health. What is civic health anyway? What is this term? The way that we have embraced civic health in our initiative, and this definition is one that we came upon from our work with the national organization that we work with on this and through some of the scholarship that's been done out there, we're defining civic health as the manner in which communities organize to define and address public problems. And I hope these images kind of get you excited about the many ways that we all do that and see that in our own communities. From protest to elected official activities and elections and political campaigns, to policy making, to informal neighborhood collaboration, to nonprofit volunteering, to education of our next generation of leaders. There are just so many ways that a healthy civil society and democracy have various levels of participation that make that a possibility. And so it's really important, I think, as we talk about civic health, at least from our initiative's perspective, to stay grounded in that really broad definition. So why does this concept matter? And why did that term sort of come to be a thing in the scholarly and in the kind of organizational lexicon of those that are working on civic health? I'm sure many of you are familiar, but Robert Putnam published in 2001 the very popular and I think wave-making book, Bowling Alone, which really highlighted the way that folks were just not participating in community in the same way that we had seen previously in earlier eras of American popular life. The notion being that we were becoming more isolated, that maybe our views were becoming more divergent. And that was published in 2001. It doesn't seem that long ago to me, but it has now been 20 years and plus. And as I don't need to tell anyone on this call, we have seen an alarming amount of polarization, separation, isolation that we can use for all day about the reasons for that. We could also talk about ways that maybe the fact that we all have such access to technology and social media may be creating new ways of connecting. And so maybe we need to analyze how we connect and how we share views with different modalities taken into consideration. But I think it's fair to say that there has been a concern over the last 20 years about a decline in civic engagement, healthy civil society relationships, and the ability to share across divergent perspectives, just like you're trying to highlight in your next event or your event on depolarization on April 23rd. And in this context, we also know that in the United States and elsewhere, there are huge disparities in civic participation across social groups. And that has been a huge part of our history in the United States, of course, both for reasons of access that might be more nuanced, but also because of overt oppression of participation of certain groups to participate. And we also know that there has been a lot of disparity and variety of participation across geographic areas as well. One of the big texts that kind of came out of this civic health discussion was some publication on the notion of civic health deserts, where in parts of the United States, participation was extremely low. And this was often present in rural communities and places where separation was probably a byproduct and part of the nature of the community itself and the way that it was set up. So, not necessarily in response to the concern about civic health that I just described, but in general and in parallel and in tandem, there is a great resource available to all of us in the United States called the National Conference on Citizenship, NCOC, that is an independent C3 organization, but it is chartered by the federal government to house certain data that is available about how Americans behave and their perspectives on civic engagement. And so they pull from these federally available sources like the census and other federal data sets to be able to, they have this clearinghouse of data that can tell us things about how Wisconsinites engage in their communities and how Americans from all of the 50 states and maybe even beyond. I'm not sure if they have data for Puerto Rico and other non-state parts of the United States, but they certainly have the 50 state data, and they call this set of data the Civic Health Index. And then they're able, as a national organization, to work with states and municipalities to run reports and sort out a little bit what they're seeing as what's happening in their own state or municipality. And although many, many other states had done this kind of an exercise of running a report, analyzing it, and then hopefully taking action based on what they found in their report, Wisconsin had never done such a report, even though many other states had done a report, not only once, but often multiple times, and were able to see longitudinally how their behavior in their state was changing. And so about 4 or 5 years ago, a little bit of an organic group of folks got together from statewide organizations and universities that were saying, you know, we've heard of this statewide reporting thing with NCOC. Maybe we should be thinking about doing it in Wisconsin. And ultimately, we have been able to get that inaugural report put together and put Wisconsin on the list of states that has actually done this kind of reporting on the civic health of our state. So just to give you a taste, if this is something that you're interested in, the NCOC website has all of the state reports published, and it's really fascinating to see the way that different states have put their initiatives together, who's participating in their initiatives to do their reporting, and how they're taking the data forward in terms of showing comparisons over time or having targeted initiatives. So I have more thorough notes in my comments on my slides, which unfortunately I can't see right now. I didn't think that through well. But just to give you a taste of a few examples on the 4 initiatives that I've highlighted here: Indiana, Connecticut, Nebraska, and Kansas. These are all states that have done this reporting well before our Wisconsin group did ours. But they're just 4 examples that we've highlighted throughout presenting about this, because they do a good job of showing kind of the variety and some good ideas about ways that states are using these reports. So for Indiana, that's an initiative we've talked to directly because they actually work closely with their lieutenant governor, and their lieutenant governor serves as an ex officio chair of their initiative. And we are pursuing ex officio seats and have secured them for our initiative. So they've been a great resource to us about the role that they crafted for their ex officio seats. But in Indiana's report, they focused on looking at the report and making 2 key recommendations. They just decided to be very streamlined about it. And one of them is that they wanted to increase educational activities for promoting civic health. So really focusing on educating Indiana Hoosiers for better civic participation. And then their other focus area was to move them from bottom 10 of the 50 states in terms of certain metrics that in their case were very related to electoral metrics. They had good engagement with like informal civic engagement, volunteering, being involved in your community. But when it came to the electoral stuff, they were low. So they focused on moving up their rankings for those electoral activities. Connecticut has many other interesting parts to their report, but one thing that they had is they created or built upon a local instrument that allowed them to look deeper than just the statewide level, but at local communities and how local communities were civically healthy or not, and how people felt about that, and then put all those local pieces into a bigger sense of Connecticut. And that really inspires us because, as you'll hear from me later today, we have this very high level data now about Wisconsin and how we behave as a civically healthy set of community members, but we don't know very much about the local or more pixelated information about certain groups. And we feel that's a huge omission right now. So we're inspired by Connecticut's ability to do a more local instrument in that way. Nebraska has some really interesting stuff about their concerns about rural communities and the way that their rural communities needed more connection. Kansas focused very, very, very specifically on the way that civic and public health was related. In fact, their report, if I'm not mistaken, was originally generated by a public health foundation in Kansas that had recognized that in order to address public health, civic health was really important. And if people were not civically engaged, they were likely to have really bad public health and personal health outcomes. And that was even pre-pandemic. So they were kind of ahead of the curve on that understanding, which I think now we all understand how intertwined those two things are, because COVID-19 has really highlighted that. So all of these statewide reports rely on not only the Civic Health Index, but then many of the states like ours does relied on also providing supplemental data that we kind of can pull in from other sources to hopefully paint a more complete picture of what our states look like in terms of civic health. So here are some of the facets of what the questions and the answers, the responses in the Civic Health Index provide. Community involvement, confidence in institutions, political participation, social connection. And you can see that this ranges from kind of formal check the box acts, like did I vote or did I give charitably this year, to also some more nuanced things like, am I connected with my neighbors? Do I trust my government? So civic health gives us an opportunity to go beyond just what are our voter registration rates to really understanding the way that people across that civic health definition participate. So what did we find for Wisconsin? Here, these next couple of slides are just going to be some kind of, I guess, they're kind of cherry-picked statistics just to paint a little bit of a picture for you of some of the data points that we found. So one thing I want to always point out with this, because I always kind of puzzle with this, is that people are self-reporting in the data that we have for civic health. So when we see that Wisconsinites said that they were at a very high level, frequently hearing from or spending time with family and friends, that's what they said, that's their perspective on it. But when we see 8% of Wisconsinites do first for neighbors, that's what they said. And that one and some of the other ones that I'll share with you always puzzle me, because from where I grew up in Wisconsin and what I see in Wisconsin, people are doing favors for each other all the time, but there might be like a little bit of a self-reporting bias that people don't want to claim that or something. So there's questions like that in the data that we still don't have the background answers for. But half of Wisconsinites frequently talk or spend time with people of different racial, ethnic, or cultural backgrounds. That's a self-reporting statistic. 38 and 36% respectively of Wisconsinites frequently talk with or spend time with neighbors or participate in at least one group. So those maybe those statistics don't mean all that much until we get into comparisons with other states. So I am going to show you that in a minute as well. Here are some other cherry-picked statistics of kind of the percentages of what people reported that they do certain activities. We have a fairly high volunteering rate in terms of how that compares to other places. But if you look at that, that's still only 37% of people report that they volunteer. Only 19% report that they frequently volunteer. 57% say that they donate to charitable or religious organizations, which I believe is high in comparison to other states. But that's one way that Wisconsinites are active, but only 8.6% donate to political organizations, although that is not that low compared to other states. So really big highlights from the report, and I think we kind of knew this as Wisconsinites, we rank really high when it comes to registering to vote and voting in elections. In terms of voting in elections, we're second in the country. We are second in the country for voting in elections, so we should be very proud of that. But when you note that the statistic of how many of us are voting is only 64.6, that means there's still 35.4% of people that we could get out there to vote. Those are eligible Wisconsinites. So that's an opportunity area, and we should maybe be thinking about getting to number 1 on that statistic. In terms of registering to vote, we're pretty high too. we rank 10th in the country on registering to vote. So this slide was summarized by a graduate student that I work with, and his assessment was, and this is in the report, we're sort of average when it comes to engaging politically outside of electoral politics. We're not necessarily shining through when it comes to posting about our views on social media. We are not necessarily that strong when it comes to attending a public meeting or contacting a public official. We are actually a little higher as we compare to the United States when it comes to using our money related to our views. And I'm going to break this down a little differently than my grad student did here. So I'll address the first two bullets on this slide in a moment, but I'm going to go right ahead to the Wisconsin ranks, because this is actually my breakdown a little bit more of how we rank. I went back through all of the report statistics in terms of how we rank with other states, and I find this analysis a little bit more useful. I hope it's useful to you. So where we're high in Wisconsin is we're high ranking compared to other states when we're talking about, do we talk to our neighbors? Do we participate in at least one group? Are we frequently in touch with family and friends? Do we volunteer, donate to charitable causes? And do we take in information about issues? That's where we show up in sort of we're ranking in the top 15 out of 50 states for those items. We're medium in terms of the following, and we're ranking between 23rd and 37th in the country across these. So we're kind of in the middle rankings when it comes to talking about issues with neighbors, working with neighbors to do something in the community, discussing issues with family and friends, making political donations, frequently posting on issues. And those two items were raised in the last slide, attending public meetings or visiting a public official. And then we're low, and again, this is self-reporting, so remember that, in doing favors for neighbors, talking to neighbors of different backgrounds, or directly helping friends and families, or frequent volunteering. So the way that I interpret this kind of high, medium, and low a little bit is that Wisconsin has very natural, organic kind of connections with each other. You know, Wisconsinites talk to their neighbors or participate in something or have strong family and friend circles of their own, maybe a little bit closer to home. They're used to giving back through volunteering and donating, and they're willing to understand and collect information and be good consumers of information. But maybe when it comes to digging in a little bit more on issues with neighbors, or directly working on a problem with neighbors in their communities, or dealing with those hard discussions with family or friends, or getting into the political donations, we're not quite as strong. And then we're a little bit lower in the self-reporting about maybe the diversity of our networks, maybe directly helping out neighbors, or at least we don't see ourselves doing that, or the frequent, consistent volunteering. So I think there's still a lot more we need to parse with those statistics that we've got. And that's why we know as an initiative, we need to gather more information, but those are some of my initial interpretations from the report. And I see it as indicating there are opportunity areas for deepening, formalizing, and popularizing engagement that we could, and that we could use some more information, better and more information sources and more educational supports. Two other points I'm now going to the top of the slide that I think is important to point out in our report is that this wasn't from the Civic Health Index, but we have data in the report about a decline in local newspapers. And also, I should have mentioned this, but a decline in competitiveness of local elections. We also saw data that tells us that the higher the education level of a Wisconsinite, almost across the board, I think it's actually true that on every statistic for which this was analyzed, there are higher levels of participation in civic health activities. So I think, you know, there are various ways we could interpret both of those pieces, but I would suggest that we should be looking at what our information sources are about local issues, since we know that our local newspapers have declined. And we should also be looking at how do we educate people well for civic participation, because we're seeing that higher education means more civic participation. So out of the report that we published in June of 2020, and kind of before, during, and after, this is sort of what we did to build an actual initiative. We knew that we couldn't just have a report. A report doesn't do anybody any good unless we have a way to move forward with some activities. And as I mentioned, talking about those other states that I mentioned, the National Conference on Citizenship and our counterparts in other states all told us when we started this work, running a report's fine, but the real thing is making sure that goes towards some work in the state around what you find in the report. So we definitely knew we wanted to make an initiative, a nonpartisan initiative with organizations, groups, and individuals that were committed to a generally civically healthy Wisconsin. So we formed a coalition initially that helped us get through the reporting phase. We published the report. We have been working on an inventory of on-the-ground efforts, and we have done outreach to a variety of participants from local organizations on the ground doing civics work, all the way up to the Lieutenant Governor and the Superintendent of Education's offices and larger statewide organizations in between. We've been trying to raise money to be very real about a logistic and essential aspect of this work. We've been applying for money and grants to be able to staff this initiative up and make it go with a little bit of a more robust platform. But to be honest, thus far, that has been something we have not had independent funding for this initiative. We basically have the contributions of the participating groups giving of staff time to this to make a coalition-based effort. But we could use more resources to make this really robust. We formed a steering committee and we convened a broader network than our steering committee of all the organizations that we had on our list of folks that are doing this work to get input on the report and on next steps. And we have confirmed ex officio participation from the Superintendent of Education and the Lieutenant Governor's office to be involved with this initiative. Two things that we're really looking at for 2022. One is to have some sort of a program that would promote community conversations across Wisconsin communities. These would be discussions that would kind of reflect the type of work that you're talking about on April 23rd, that gets at how do we have conversations across very divergent, polarized perspectives in our society right now. So we're looking at having a program like that we would roll out across Wisconsin communities. That is something that other civic health projects have done in other states and municipalities. And we're gonna have kind of a marquee event on April 28th at Memorial Union. We hope you'll all join us. It'll be the first ever convening of a civic health focused, all Wisconsin kind of all call, get together, or, and we're calling it's our community conference for our Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies. And the theme is on civic health of Wisconsin. So please, please, please mark your calendar and plan to come to that. We hope it's going to be a really catalytic moment for this initiative. And the blue in this slide is actually a hyperlink, so I'll make sure that you all can get the slides, but that will lead you to our webpage where you can find the report on our webpage, as well as our list of our steering committee, as well as our list of the network members that we've identified thus far, although we're building those lists all the time. And I'm going to ask you at the end of this presentation to share with me if there are groups that you think should be involved with this that we might not have involved yet. And also at the end, once I'm done with the slides, I'll try to make sure that I can just show you the website on the screen share as well. So we've got these different activities that we're working on. I'm sure many on this call are aware that while we've been working on this, there have been some churnings about civic education at the Capitol. We're connected with a targeted group that's working on civic education. And because we've got the superintendent involved, we're very hopeful that we can make some good connections to that very important issue. This slide kind of repeats what I've mentioned that we're working on. One of the things though too that I'll point out is that, like the Connecticut report, we're really hoping to be able to have something that looks like a more localized instrument that we can use to find out, what does civic engagement look like in this neighborhood in Milwaukee? What does civic engagement look like in this rural community up north? Because what does civic engagement look like on this tribal land? Because we think that this conglomerate data that we have, this statewide data that we have, it's very high level and it's very broad strokes. And we know there are many more stories about the experiences of specific Wisconsinites and groups that we need to collect to really understand our civic health. We did have a really conscious approach in our initiative. I want to point this out without expecting you to absorb this very wordy slide, but I think it's really important to point out that we've had a very conscious process as an initiative about the why, what, how of what we're trying to do. And so I just mentioned this because I think these issues are really complex, and they're immediately from talking about civics in Wisconsin. I would like to believe that conversation could happen without it being a controversy or a polarization kind of conversation. But I think the reality is we're living in a world where even talking about voting rights, sadly, it does invoke some of these things. And so we've been very conscious about creating a why, what, how that we believe has a distinctly nonpartisan, for the greater good of Wisconsin, for the greater good of democracy, for the greater good of all kind of spirit to what we're doing, and that we hope anyone in Wisconsin, no matter where they are on the spectrum, could embrace. So these next two slides, we actually prepared for a different presentation, and I don't want to cut our reflection time short. So there are some sort of themes that we see right now in history and today across these efforts, but I'm actually not going to get into them too much, but maybe just, if you're a fast reader, you'll see some themes here while I just pop through them that get you thinking. One of the things I'll point out is just, again, this notion of broad spectrum of civic engagement is really at the fore of the way that we're trying to approach these issues. It's not just voting. It's also, what's philanthropy doing? What are civil society organizations doing? What are protesters doing that might not even participate in traditional electoral stuff because they don't think the system's working for them? You know, there's such a range of activity that I think we want to really contemplate in our ideas about civic health. Another set of thoughts just that you can take in for a moment there, but I think these are not surprising, and I don't really need to explain them. These are some themes that we're thinking about. So another thing I think it's important to point out, I will admit, when we started this initiative, you know, a few years ago, before we ran our Civic Health of Wisconsin report, I don't think we were really talking about this 4-alarm fire that I now feel is important to raise almost anytime we talk about any of these issues. So we are living in a moment where environmental degradation of democracy and civil discourse, ongoing racial injustice and violence, and other historic inequities and oppression, and COVID-19 have ramped up in our awareness, our popular conception. They've all been there. And many of us and many of you have been experiencing these things for a long time or aware of them for a long time. I don't want to suggest they're new, but I do want to suggest that there's kind of an inflection point that we're living in where these issues are urgent. And when I'm teaching students about being nonprofit leaders or engaged in civil society, or when I present on why we need to think about civic health, I think it would be remiss not to acknowledge the urgency of some of these things. So we want to keep that in mind. And I think it's easy to see how civic participation and civic health relates to each of these things. Policies around what we're going to do about the environment have to come from civic engagement. The degradation of democratic institutions and the polarization that we're experiencing, I mean, that's right at the heart of why we need civic health. Resolving some of these very difficult questions of how we're going to get our systems working for all people and overcome our very troubling history as a country and a state and in many of our communities related to racism and sexism and other isms that have made the experiences of people in our communities so different and often kept voices stifled and experiences very inequitable. We have to figure out how to address those things, in a healthy civic health society is where that's going to come from. And COVID-19. I mean, I think we all know that if we had a perfectly civically healthy utopian participation in Wisconsin, the United States, I think COVID-19 and the interventions and outcomes would look a lot different. So the one I'm going to point out really specifically though here for today, that out of this 4-alarm fire, that I think just has to be acknowledged when we talk about civic health, is that there is a lot of consensus right now that democracy globally is on the decline. And this is extremely troubling. And if you are paying attention to these sources, you know that nobody leaves the United States of America out of that. You know, Benjamin Franklin, what did we get? We got a republic if we can keep it. And I think there are very valid and widespread concerns right now that we have to be minding whether we're going to keep it. And so globally, there has been 15 years of decline, according to many reputable studies. This one image shows you in the middle of that, that the number of countries that improved their institutions and governments and systems towards a more democratic approach, compared to those that were on the decline on those metrics, the gap, as that's statistically defined here, you can see that it's increased in the last 15 years. In 2021, The Economist came out with a very specific report that said that there was an unprecedented rollback of democratic freedoms in 2020. And you can see the map that they've got there, the color-coded map there, that shows the way that they're coding certain countries. And the United States is showing up as a flawed democracy there. And that is not the only reporting source that puts the United States at about a B- level in terms of whether our democratic institutions are holding. And on the left-hand side of this slide, I'll just point out that wherever you are on the political spectrum, even though I recognize that these discussions have become very polarized, even the Harvard Business School is reporting that for capitalism, the decline of democracy is a current and mortal threat. That article was published January 4th of 2022. So if you are a very conservative Republican and you think that some of these discussions have been hyped by the other side of the spectrum, I just invite everyone to recognize that there's definitely folks on both sides of the traditional political spectrum that are recognizing that this is a real concern. So I am going to pause there and allow you to kind of process what I shared about Wisconsin, our civic health initiative, the context that we're in, and really kind of tap your wisdom here. Some prompt questions for you that I'd love for you to consider and share about in the chat is, what strikes you about these findings? To what extent do these findings or what I've talked about today reflect your own community or not? What else should we be doing or thinking about for a high impact Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative? What efforts in your community are addressing civic health? How could the Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative offer value to you or your community? And I don't expect everybody to respond about any of these things. I would suggest that you grab onto the question or the prompt there that you're inspired by. And just, I'd love to hear your reflections in the chat and then ask my co-facilitators to share them out.
Yes, I will, Mary Beth, also present a question that did come up in Q&A as you began. Just more curious on how the data was collected and obtained for the Civic Health Index.
Yes, thank you for that. So as I mentioned, the Civic Health Index is a compilation of federally collected data related to the census and other surveys that the federal government conducts. Some are related to, I'm going to fail to remember all of the different like sources, but basically NCOC, our federal partner, takes that data and then is able to run the reports for us on those statistics. But there is a phone survey modality that is used for at least one of this, for those questions related to your participation. And I can't remember which federal agency actually does it, but it's an actual phone survey. And that's why that question of self-selection kind of comes into play, because it's like, well, what does a person think they should say about whether they help their neighbors or not? I hope that's helpful. I should be able to provide a more complete answer and follow up if needed.
Yeah, we again look at the questions presented by Mary Beth Collins, and you can respond in chat if you'd like to reflect on what strikes you about the findings. What should we be doing to impact the civic health of Wisconsin? What efforts are going on in your community or in Madison or in your neighborhood to improve the civic health of the community? We do have another, maybe more so a question. How will your effort address the problems discussed in Catherine Kramer's work on the politics of resentment?
Yeah.
That was the rural-urban divide.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And Kathy Kramer, being at the university, is connected and has been in convenings around how we're going to form this initiative. I mean, I think that the urban-rural divide and her book is a source for us that, you know, tells us already that some of the differences between rural and urban, but I think it really speaks to that question of can we get more pixelated data about individual communities and what they're experiencing. And I also think her work speaks to the polarization. I mean, people that are living in rural communities have these very different experiences than somebody in, you know, downtown Madison or Milwaukee even can really understand or relate to. And I think that we've seen that phenomenon kind of unfurl, particularly between 2016 to 2020, in terms of people kind of realizing, wow, like there really is a discontent there and a lack of trust in institutions that haven't been working for certain people in those contexts. I also tend to believe that we shouldn't oversimplify that point. And I don't think Kathy would either, because I'm seeing, and I don't know if you are, but through my work at the center, I'm seeing some Wisconsin rural communities that are some of the most proactive I've seen in really forward-thinking approaches to like food systems and getting people engaged. And so I think it depends on which rural community and which urban community. I also think there are urban communities in Wisconsin that are feeling just as disenfranchised as some of those rural communities. So I think it's complicated. I think the urban-rural divide, though, is something that it's also helpful for us to be a part of that national network, because we're not the only state dealing with that. And there might be some learnings and lessons that we can share with each other about. I mean, one of the big disappointments of the pandemic is, in theory, we should be going to this conference in Washington, D.C. every year to meet up with the other states. And I was able to do that once before we did our report, but it'll be helpful when we can do that again and really have those connections with other states. So those are some reflections. That was a little rambling.
No. Julie had this reaction. Excellent, eye-opening, provocative presentation. How much disengagement do you think resulted from or was worsened by the pandemic, the lockdown, virtual meetings, etc.? How has the pandemic affected our civic engagement?
Yeah, that is such a good question. Thank you. And I can't believe I didn't point it out more explicitly. So thank you very much for that prompt. So I think this cuts both ways. Okay. I think in our report, we did mention that we published in June of 2020. So we did acknowledge in this kind of anticipatory way, the way that even then systems were shifting for voting access to address the pandemic. If you think about Wisconsin, we had already had the April 2020 election, which was like this hot moment where we hadn't had any time to process the pandemic, but there was an election, a really important determinative one. And people found ways. People turned out in record turnout. It was talked about a lot, but there was also controversy, right? About like when the election would take place and how it would be delivered. And then we published in 2020 or June of 2020, before we knew what would happen in November 2020. In November 2020, we had record turnout again. And so here's what I think about that. I think the pandemic has obviously created new barriers for civic participation, from voting to showing up at your legislator's office to communing with your neighbors in a natural way. But on the other hand, I've sent my students to a lot of city council meetings, and they've been able to go to like federal congressional hearings, because the notion of modality has just opened up so much. Everybody's just doing everything online. So there's some access that people have. I also think that if you look at what happened in the summer of 2020 with George Floyd, the fact that people were cooped up and were looking at their screens and did know about that, and you just saw a level of attention to that that maybe wouldn't have been there if everybody was running around having their summer vacation. And I think that the pandemic has also pointed out our polarization to us and pointed out to us the way that policies and government institutions and our trust in those systems and our willingness to collaborate with each other in our communities about what the community standards should be, these things are not just academic. They come down to literally day-to-day realities for our health and well-being. And that's true for wherever you are on the spectrum. And so I think that we don't know what the longitudinal effect of the pandemic will be, but I think it's opened our eyes to, I think it should open our eyes to the need for civic health and the ways that we can and should be nimble and responsive when conditions change to make sure that no matter what is going on in the world, people can find ways to engage.
Well, Laura wonders what are the best ways to engage those who are not currently participating?
Yeah, so I tend to believe, and I'd love pushback on this if others disagree, but I tend to have this belief that if everyone sort of did a self-reflection on what's really important to you in terms of your relationship to the world and your community, and what are some little pressure points and leverage points that you might have in your life that you feel comfortable with, and everybody did that, that we would have a more civically healthy society. I used to say, if everyone participates to the maximum degree that they're able to, then we'll have a healthier civil society. But I will admit, January 6th made me really think about how to describe that, because I looked at some of the people that were showing up at the Capitol that day and I thought, well, they think that they're participating to a maximum degree of, getting out there. And I didn't think that the things that they were doing were civically healthy. In fact, I thought they were very threatening to our civil society and our governmental functions. So I think one thing that we need to do is break down the barriers that people have in their mind, that to be civically engaged, you have to know everything. Yeah, it's over. I think people get a little paralyzed by the fact that there are so many issues that we could be working on, and they're all urgent. And a lot of people don't feel like they know how to contact a legislator or get really involved deeply in a sophisticated effort to address these things. And my point would be, we should be reminding people that the smallest acts of support for an organization you believe in, a volunteer shift that you can fit into your life, maybe with your retirement, that a small product sale choice, even a boycott of a product that you think is not right, is not, there are just, and on the next slide, I'm gonna point out, but what I think we should be encouraging people to do is to have a personal plan for their own diet of civic engagement that they can actually sustain and that they feel comfortable with. If everybody did that, even if they only focus on one issue or two small acts, I think we'd have a more civically healthy society. And the moment when I really started thinking about this deeply was early 2017. I saw this moment when all these people had been consuming their political TV, being in their political parties, feeling like they knew where we stood as a United States of America. And they woke up on the morning after the 2016 election and they were hair on fire, many of them, hair on fire, can't believe this is happening. How could Donald Trump become our president? And without getting into too many personal details, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. at that time of the Women's March. And I saw just that extreme mobilization of people, but it was after the fact. It was after the fact. And it made me think, like, if every single one of these people had maybe just done a little bit more before, and it's not to place blame, it's just to say, I want to see a Wisconsin where this is a constant, steady heartbeat of participation, and we're not waiting for those breaking points to get out in the streets. I think that would be great. And I think that means we have to make civically healthy activities a daily diet of everyone.
And but while we did, even in a pandemic, have record high voter turnout in the 2020 national presidential election, as a citizen and as someone who votes in every single election and a member of the League of Women Voters, one thing I'm concerned about is that there's less voter participation when it comes to the non-presidential years, the local elections that are coming up, or the elections even for governor or state legislator. I don't think voters that we have the kind of voter participation in those elections as we do in a presidential election, and that's troubling because so many things get done on the local level.
100%. I think there is very important commentary coming from many folks about that phenomenon. And I think things like the decline of local newspapers and the decline of local election competitiveness. And one of the things, just as a small example of how we're trying to address that, is at our annual event, or at our community conference on April 28th, we want to have a station where people can fill out even just a worksheet of who are my elected officials in my district, down to like your neighborhood association president or your elder, but all the way up. Because I mean, even that kind of information, this is what I mean about those barriers. Like, I've done a lot of get out the vote activity in my day as just a regular citizen, you know, notwithstanding my job and my role in this stuff. And I am in other community contexts where a lot of what I hear from people is like, it's kind of rare for somebody to even be like that up to speed on what's even happening in their own like city government or county government. And that's okay. I mean, lives are complicated. People have a lot of things that they are trying to take care of, children and parents and jobs and budgets. And I am very sympathetic to that. But I think what we could do as an initiative is, and this relates to the local elections thing, is really try to make it more of a cultural norm and a social norm that people are aware of even what's going on with that stuff. And I'm not exactly sure how we're going to do that, but I think that's a huge opportunity area. And I think getting people when they're young, before they do go out in the world, you know, in school, and that's why education relates to this as well, could be a big part of that.
Speaking of education, I'm not sure you can address this. Maybe you can. Are there any standard guidelines for curriculum in civics education in Wisconsin schools at this time?
Yes, there are. There is a fairly recent, when we published the report, I think the legislation was only a couple of years old, and it's in the report. But there is legislation that's been passed and it's on the books that says that students, before they can get a Wisconsin public high school diploma, must pass a civics exam. It's recent enough that we really have no way of knowing, and it's being administered by the local school district. So we don't have, one of the things we're advocating for is to collect that data of like, how are the students doing, or like, how are the teachers preparing students for that? We don't know a lot about its administration. It was basically like required and then passed on to the local districts, but we'll be working with the superintendent on that. Maybe more importantly, since then though, and this unfortunately is very in the web of this polarized setting that we're in right now, there have been competing initiatives at the legislature, even in the last 6 months, related to education, and the term civics is used in it. But depending on who you ask, some people believe that the Republican proposed bill, you know, it has more of a tinge of maybe like other intentions that might be involved than just preparing folks for civil society. There's a debate about that. And so we have, luckily, people on our initiative that are specifically focused on education. And there is a group that's kind of forming in parallel that is specifically about promoting best practices for Wisconsin civics education. Other states that have done the NCOC process have made their entire initiative about that. So Illinois, for example, I think out of their civic health initiative, passed statewide legislation that really upped the ante on statewide civics requirements. Ours are pretty light. So that's an opportunity area as well.
And Mary Beth, we have lots more questions and actually are running short of the time that we set aside for your presentation. You mentioned you had some more slides. So should we continue on or there we go.
I think I'm just going to point out this one thing. And then I think what I'd love if Joy and Trish would find a way for it to be possible is to ask you to reach out to me after the presentation if you have specific thoughts on these ideas. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had the chance to reflect a little bit on a couple of other things that we're weaving into our work. So one is we had a brainstorm in our initiative that it might benefit us all if we had a little bit more of a sense of our history of Wisconsin civic health, kind of the premise that you got to know where you've been to know where you're going. So we tried to start at least like this starting point document that I can share with anybody that's interested, but we basically tried to take all the like tried and true, well understood in the dominant history kind of way, touch points of our journey as a Wisconsin from native inhabitants of the area to today, like high level touch points in this history. But what we want to do is maybe move that into a more crowdsourced project where we can hear the stories of people's experiences in Wisconsin that maybe didn't make the dominant history. So learning more about like what groups have had to advocate more for their civic health, or what groups have had really innovative interventions that have made them really active in their communities. And so we're just trying to explore, like, is there a way we could do something kind of akin to like an oral history or a community history that could enhance our understanding of Wisconsin. And I think Kathy Kramer's book and its wild popularity is such a great example of how when you really dig in on what some of these stories are, it can really help people understand, like, why are we seeing what we're seeing in Wisconsin? So that's kind of what we're thinking about that. If you have ideas or you know of stories in your communities from the past that would be good to include in there, we'd love to hear it. And then this is actually a little bit more of like a personal brainstorm that I've had for years and years and years, but something like this, I think, could be an interesting project for us to think about. And this relates to what I said earlier about people coming up with their own diet for their civic engagement. I think I like to think about this like rubric of things that like everybody in theory has the opportunity to do in their lives, and people making like a personalized plan for their individual engagement. And then another component that could be supportive in that, it would be like having a circle, like a book club, where you make sure you get together and you kind of talk about, hey, these are the things I did this month in these categories. So I'm not going to have a lot of time to like get into that brainstorm, but I think that if you have ideas about how we could promote people to make individual plans for engagement and then make sure they're supported in that in a really just community-based way, that's something that I'd love to hear from people about. And I think I would love to encourage you all to take that list of bullet points there and make some notes to yourself about like, hey, it's still early 2022. Like, what do you want to do in 2022? And it could be as simple as like, I don't want to buy from big box stores if I don't have to. I want to support my local hardware store. It could be, I'm going to try to have a tough conversation with my cousin that sees things differently than me. I'm going to try to make sure I get my 2 young nieces and nephews to register to vote this year. That could be it. But if everybody did that, that could be really impactful, right? So those were the things. And then I will land on this slide because it gives you both the URL for not only our center's webpage, but also specifically the tab that will get you to our Civic Health of Wisconsin information. I really encourage you to go there. It shows who's involved. It shows the report. And it shows how you can get in touch with us if you have ideas. And then just that also on our website, I didn't include the exact link to the tab for it, but you can find on our website the registration page for our community conference on April 28th, which I really hope will have you all interested in at least. And if the Madison Civics Club would like to have a table or an official role with us, we would also be delighted for that. So I'll just pause there. And whenever you feel like that slide's been up long enough, Joy, I can stop screen sharing and let you move on to the next part.
Okay, well, if we can keep it up just for a moment, as we will, I hope, share your slides on our website as well. And then anybody can also see that contact information, read more about it, share ideas with Mary Beth Collins that way. I'm definitely looking forward to attending the conference on April 23rd, and I'll talk with my Trish and my board with the Madison Civics Club if we should have a table as well. But I think this is wonderful. I think it's given us a ton of food for thought here and ideas on things that we can do to help improve the civic health of Wisconsin. Will this conference, Mary Beth, will this sort of help Wisconsin narrow down? Here are the areas that we do want to concentrate on, just like those other states did?
Well, that's a really good question. I think what the conference will have is absolutely interactive workshop type activities where people will be able to share their opinions, thoughts, ideas, and about the work they're doing locally. I think what we're going to focus on at that, just because it's going to be so many people, we hope, is to really get a better inventory of the local initiatives and the barriers and the opportunities that they're seeing, and so that we can connect people that are doing this work locally and really lift up what they're doing. And then I think that information will be taken back to the steering committee of the Civic Health of Wisconsin initiative and help us, probably narrow our work a little bit. But I will just say that one thing we do embrace in our initiative that's a little different than other states is that we really are trying not to be too top down about this. We're trying not to say, oh, we're the important statewide group and we're going to claim what the 2 focus areas should be. We're really trying to acknowledge that there are people that have been doing this work, that are doing this work on the front lines, and they probably know a lot more than a lot of us do. And so for the time being, we're trying to make sure we're also creating a fertile ground for kind of a constellation of efforts. Eventually some narrowing might need to happen, but we're really trying to prioritize that broad-based input for now.
Well, lots of compliments. You can probably take down your slide now. And as you do that, I will say that lots of very positive feedback, that this was a great springboard inspiration for getting involved, and a lot of people feeling like they got a lot of good ideas. One suggestion: can you approach people in active non-white churches who may be willing to tell their stories, trying to perhaps make sure that we are getting all communities involved in the effort to improve the civic health of Wisconsin. And there were a couple of other questions and comments that had to do with civility as well. So I think that that's foremost on a lot of people's minds, that we need to address the civility in our discourse, which we will do, by the way, on April 23rd. That'll be at least one avenue for trying to improve our civil discourse. So please mark that on your calendars as well. Saturday, April 23rd, from about 8:30 until 12:30, we're going to have breakfast. We're going to have our program, and then we're going to have this workshop with the Braver Angels on depolarization within. So I hope you'll be able to join us for that. Mary Beth Collins, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you all so much. And I look forward to being in further touch.
Yes, we'll see you in April.
Okay,
Good.
you. Yeah.
And it's time now to award our youth grants. So we will welcome in, when Trish is able to bring in our attendees as panelists, we are going to be awarding our youth grant to Senate Middle School in Madison, where a group of staff, students, and community members are planning to build an outdoor experience space. This is really a really interesting idea. on the website, it says this will be a model for inclusively engaging students of all genders, abilities, and backgrounds who often don't have a voice in creating their environment. The design incorporates gardening and interactive games, outdoor classroom spaces, art, pathways, and much more, including a covered pavilion that will serve as a meeting place for student groups that don't have a meeting place now. And we thought this was a very worthy cause, and it's involving students who are involved in making this happen. And so we are going to award our first youth grant for 2022, a $1,000 grant to Senate Middle School for this project. Now let me bring on so we can hear from a teacher at Senate Middle School. Lori Longini is with us, and she has with her 3 students, and maybe we have 3 students. I see we have at least 2, but I think we have 3 students. And Lori, if I could ask you to put your camera on if you have that ability. Trish, I'm not sure if you gave her that ability, so we can hear and see Lori. Lori, are you there?
I'm here. I can talk, but I don't have the ability for you to see me.
Oh, I apologize for that. Maybe
Okay.
Trish will be able to work that out, but why don't you go ahead and let me congratulate you for applying and receiving the $1,000 Madison Civics Center Civics Club Youth Grant for this project. Tell us why this project is needed.
So thank you very, very much for giving it to us. We are so grateful. So Senate Middle School, we are located on the Far East Side. We are right next to La Follette High School. And we have a little over 600 kids, about 638 students at our school. So it's one of the biggest middle schools in the city. And our outdoor space has very little for students to do. So we've been working over the last couple of years to try and get some more active space for students to use. Specifically, since the pandemic has happened, kids need outdoor space, and we found a greater need for it because we as staff members would like to take students outside for more classes. So we have been working with the UW and the Arboretum program there. Oh, Joy, maybe I have a camera.
Oh, go ahead and click on. There you are. Hi, good to see you.
So we've been working with the Arboretum and a program, some student Arboretum designers, and they have helped us design our outdoor front space to include some outdoor classroom spaces, an amphitheater space, a ninja course, all sorts of things. And part of that included a pavilion space, because a lot of our students, when it starts to get a little sprinkly, or if the sun's too hot, or it starts to rain a little bit, they want to be able to go under some cover. So the part of the grant that we apply to with you is the pavilion space. Some of the students that are here right now, a couple of them literally race outside at recess time because there's an area underneath some trees that has a couple of benches, and that's where they want to be at recess time, so that they have a space that's a little bit covered, that's comfortable to hang out at. A couple of our clubs go outside in some of that space after school, but we just wanted a space for them to be able to be comfortable. And then also the idea of this outdoor space is also for community members to use when we're not in school. The Far East Side, we don't have a lot of places for people to just go and gather and commune, especially on a bus line. When Senate is on, it's right on the 16 line, which a lot of our families can access. So we're really excited about it. So we're very grateful for you all to contribute to us. So
wonderful. Lori, could you introduce the students that we have with us? And
Yeah.
Students, if you can try to put your cameras on, we'd love to see you too.
All right. So I have Hadija Kano is here with us. She's a 6th grader from my homeroom. And I have Marion Good, and I have Ava Epps, and they are all 6th graders at Senate this year.
And you guys should be able to do the start video.
So if you can click your camera on and take your mute buttons off, students, we can, I just like, maybe I'll just start with,
Here we go.
I think Ava's on first. Great. So Ava, tell us what you hope to use this this space for, and why you're involved in working on this.
I hope to use this space for just to be outside and more into being outside and having a comfortable place to be, because as a student, sometimes when we don't want to go outside or there isn't really a place for us where we have to be under the sun or in the cold weather, they just like to go inside the doors or something. And I think having a place where we can be under something is a little bit more comfortable for us.
Yeah, this sounds great. And is it Hadisha? Hadisha, can you unmute and put on your camera? And same question, why are you involved in this project, and what do you hope to use this space for?
We hope to use it because we don't really have a lot of outdoor activities and that could really help us to do more outdoor classes, because a lot of kids really want to have more fun outside instead of just doing everything inside. They want to learn more about the plants and outside plant things, and it'll be a great opportunity for everyone to try something new and have classes outside.
Wonderful. And Marion, are you still there? You can do the same thing. Her name went away, so maybe somehow we have a technical difficulty there. So, all right, so you can't turn your camera on. That's okay. Go ahead and unmute yourself if you're able to do that, and then you can at least. Oh, I can't unmute either. Well, that's all right.
Oh no.
Technical. Oh, there we go. Go ahead, Marion.
I can't turn my video on, but I hope to.
That's okay. That's okay. We can hear you. So tell us why you're involved in this project and what you hope to use the space for.
I hope to use the space for especially GSA. It's a club that I go to every Tuesday, and if you're not familiar with it, it stands for Gender Sexuality Alliance. It's just a safe space for members of the LGBTQ community to just hang out. And we never really had a specific place to be, and we all love to be outside when the weather's nice. So I think the pavilion structure would be a really nice space to be. And also, like Khadijah said, like outdoor spaces, that'd be great for like outdoor classes, like science learning opportunities, you know, because Miss Longini, she's the science teacher. And I know she would really want to do that.
I love it. I do. I think this is just a really great project. And I think that it has so many benefits for not only the students, but the community as a whole. So I want to thank all of you for joining us. And I want to congratulate all of you for working on this great idea. And I hope that the $1,000 grant from the Madison Civics Club will help make this a reality. And Lori, I noticed that there's more information about this whole project on the website, and the community can donate as well.
Yes, so there are several different parts to the project, and we're getting funding from a variety of different places, and it's being done in sections so that we don't have to wait till we have all of the funding. So as we get enough funding for each portion, we're moving forward. As soon as the ground thaws, we're moving forward with a Gaga pit. We're moving forward with part of like, kind of like, it's not a labyrinth, but like with like these discs, wood discs that are going to create kind of a pattern out in front. Then we're moving forward with like a ninja course. And then the next piece will be the pavilion part, which this funding will go towards. So we're hoping to have the pavilion done, fingers crossed, if we get enough funding by the end of the summer. So we're super excited. So yes, we'll take anybody's money. We're super excited.
Wonderful. And again, thank you very much for being with us today for this first program of the Madison Civics Club for 2022. Thanks to everybody for joining us today. Thanks to our speaker, Mary Beth Collins, for all that great information on the civic health of Wisconsin. I hope this will get all of us motivated and more involved in the civic life of our community. And I hope we can make a difference this year, following through on all the different things we're going to be working on. Again, a reminder that we will have, we hope, an in-person meeting on April 23rd, Saturday morning. It'll be the first in-person Madison Civics Club event since the pandemic began, fingers crossed. And we will have the Braver Angels co-coordinators in Wisconsin facilitate, conduct a workshop on improving our civil discourse. It's called Depolarization Within. So we will have more information about that workshop on our website soon, and we'll be sending out an email to all people who are on our email list. So look for more information on that coming up in April. And again, if you'd like to be on the email list, if you would like to volunteer and get more involved with Madison Civics Club, send us an email, info@madisoncivicsclub.org. Okay, thanks everybody. Have a really great weekend, and hope to see you in April. Bye.